I am often amazed at what a slow learner I am. It seems that I need to be told things a number of times for it to slowly sink in past this thick metal encasement. And, when it comes to changing my mind, changing an attitude or behavior, that usually requires repeated beatings by a 2x4 or some kind of stunning event to wake me up. And it just seems that it's easy for us to kind of ride on our assumptions and our well-practiced behaviors. Because changing them, even wanting to change them, can be hard. And if you don't believe me, just try changing your diet. Or just try to think about exercise. Right, Father Glenn? Now, Jesus knows this. And he knows that the coming of the kingdom of God involves a revolution in how we think and act. He knows that following him involves a real change in our assumptions and priorities, and this kind of change is difficult for us. And so we often resort to outrageous actions and images to kind of wake us up, to kind of move us to live lives worthy of the gospel. And these last 2 weeks, we've seen instances of some of these outrageous actions and images. Think about how gruesome it is if you were to cut off your hand or your foot or pluck out your eye. It's a gruesome image. But he knows I need to use these kind of images to wake us up. Now, let's get clear here. Jesus is not suggesting you actually do this. Are we over there on this? He's not actually suggesting you cut your hand off or your foot off or pluck your eye out. No, in fact, if you pay attention to the text, he's proposing a shocking contrast to wake us up to the power and beauty and significance of the kingdom of God. That's what it's really at. In our modern world, many consider our Christian faith irrelevant. Even some of our friends and family members don't think it really merits their time. And even we who do actually show up, sometimes can have rather low expectations of what our faith can mean for us. But make no mistake, the coming of the kingdom of God involves a revolution. Jesus is telling us that the coming of God's kingdom means everything will change. Everything. Now, this is why he's making these outrageous statements and images. You see, the kingdom of God is so much more than we expect. Jesus believed there was nothing as important as God's power and presence, God's peace and justice and love coming into our world and our lives. He believed that into our violent world was coming God's peace. Into our unjust world was coming God's justice and freedom. God is coming to heal and free us and renew us. Nothing in Jesus' mind is more important than that. Now think about how horrific it would be to cut off your hand or foot. What's this strange, shocking contrast that Jesus is proposing? He's suggesting that it is far better to live in a world filled with God's justice and peace and love, and not have a hand or an eye and foot, than to live in a hellish world war and violence, poverty and brutality, and have your hands and feet numb. Because in his mind, nothing is as significant and meaningful as the coming of God's kingdom here and now. Now the change that coming kingdom involves requires our cooperation. And our cooperation with the kingdom will involve a turning upside down of everything. And this takes us to the next kind of stunning image that Jesus uses. Jesus demonstrates how much the kingdom will turn our world upside down by embracing Peter's little daughter. Remember this from last week? He comes to Capernaum, goes into Peter's house, sits down with the boys. They're all asking who's the most important, because they're clueless. And he pulls over Peter's daughter, puts his arms around her. Now for us, that's a cute, wonderful image, very nice. Not in the ancient world, not in Jesus' world. A child was invisible, powerless, disposable, irrelevant. So when Jesus embraces Peter's daughter, he is welcoming her. The least, he is welcoming her and telling us, if we're going to be his disciples, we have to welcome and embrace the least in our world. And in doing so, he's flipping upside down our world's priorities. See, we love to rub elbows with the popular and attractive and the powerful. That's why I hang out with Father Glenn. Wealth and connections, let's face it, they're very attractive. We welcome people who look and sound like us. But Jesus calls us to welcome the least, just as he did. He's asking us to prioritize the powerless, the useless, the worthless, those with no status and no rights. Talk about a revolution. We are very good at ignoring or even demonizing the poor and the desperate and the most vulnerable. There sits Jesus with his arms around that person of color, that widow, that homeless child, that addict, looking at us and saying, are you going to come and be part of my mission? Now, in our world today, who would be the least? The people that need our welcome and embrace. Well, let's just start with one example. There are so many. How about the people of Haiti? These certainly seem to qualify as one of the least. Recently, they have suffered from earthquakes. There is terrible poverty in that country. Political anarchy, warlords run amok. And we have watched our current administration reject them, send them home. Instead of welcoming them and embracing them as the gospel says, they sent them home. The gospel has a lot to say about that. Now the church herself, if you have any knowledge of church history, has not always embraced the least. Think about how the church has treated people of color, children, women. We need a different response. We need the response that Jesus calls us to take. Consider, just to push the envelope a little further, the LGBT community. Do we welcome them? Or do we condemn them? Do we treat them with dignity as human beings created in the image of God? Or do we cry out, crucify, crucify? Now this doesn't mean we have to accept everything this community is about. But Jesus calls us to welcome the least, the alienated, the marginalized, respect them and listen to them. I told you the gospel is a revolution. I told you it turns our world upside down. It is very challenging stuff. And I know it can be hard to hear, unless, of course, you are poor, or in need, or alone, or have been marginalized, or an outcast. Then it's good news. And by the way, I find this as challenging as anybody else. When I walk into 7-Eleven, I want to get my stuff. And I don't want to have to face the homeless person outside who's asking me for money. But there's Jesus sitting there with his arms around her, looking at me and saying, Deacon, you going to join my mission? What are you going to do? This call that Jesus makes to us is not easy. But you know what? You know who else the Lord embraces? You know who else the Lord puts his arms around? Every one of us. Every one of you. He is putting his arms around you, welcoming you no matter what you've done in the past, no matter what you're thinking. He welcomes you, embraces you, loves you, and wants to fill you with his life. So my friends, tonight, I encourage you, say yes to his embrace. Welcome him into your life, and it will change your world, and you will find you'll be more open to welcoming the least in our world. This is the kind of revolution our world needs. So ask the Lord for the grace to change, to open your minds and hearts, to be his disciple, and welcome the least among us.